You ever see someone freeze in the middle of a challenge like they just remembered a ghost? The wind on Kareth Nine always carried dust that tasted like rust and old metal, the kind that stuck to your teeth when you breathed too deep. And that afternoon the arena floor looked like a red ocean under the twin suns hanging about 30 degrees above the horizon, bright enough to throw long shadows across the steel viewing platforms that circled the pit. I was standing in the middle of it with a wrench still clipped to my belt, boots covered in engine grease from a mining rig I'd been repairing less than an hour earlier, wondering how a maintenance job turned into a public duel announcement. My name is Ethan Carter, born in Ohio, white guy, 6 feet tall on a good day, and about as far from a professional warrior as a man could get. I fix machines. I replace coolant lines. I calibrate mining drills that weigh about 3 tons and run on fusion cores the size of a small refrigerator. But on Kareth Nine, none of that mattered once the crowd started gathering. Alien miners, traders, security officers, dozens of species leaning over the railings above the arena, their voices blending into a low electric hum that vibrated through the metal structure like a generator warming up. And then she walked in. Kareth Nine. Even if you'd never heard her name, you knew what she was the second you saw her. 7 feet tall if she was an inch, blue skin catching the sunlight like polished cobalt, shoulders straight, posture calm in that confident way only someone undefeated can manage. Her armor wasn't bulky like human combat gear. It was sleek, layered plates that shifted slightly as she moved, like the scales of something built for both speed and strength. In one hand she carried a long spear whose metal shaft reflected the sky, and when she drove the tip into the packed red soil of the arena floor the sound echoed like a bell. The crowd went silent almost instantly. That kind of silence only happens when everyone knows something important is about to start. Her golden eyes swept across the arena until they stopped on me. I remember thinking there had to be some mistake. Maybe she meant the security officer standing behind me or the cargo pilot leaning against the gate. But then she lifted the spear and pointed it directly at my chest. "Human," she said, her voice deep and steady, the translator in my collar turning the alien syllables into clean English. "Step forward and face me." I actually looked over my shoulder to make sure she wasn't talking to someone else. Nobody moved. The crowd above us leaned closer, waiting. I took one step forward, mostly because standing still felt even weirder. Up close, she was even taller, the top of her head a full foot above mine, sunlight glinting along the edges of her armor. She studied my face carefully, like she was comparing me to a picture only she could see. Then something changed. The confidence drained out of her expression so fast it felt like the air pressure dropped in the arena. Her grip on the spear tightened, but she didn't raise it. Instead, she just stared at me. Her eyes widened. For a long moment, she didn't say anything at all. Then, barely above a whisper, she said one word. "Impossible." And just like that, the most feared warrior on Kareth Nine stopped moving completely, as if seeing me standing there had suddenly rewritten the rules of whatever fight she thought she was about to start. I had no idea why she was looking at me like that, but every instinct I had told me the answer had something to do with a part of my past I'd spent years trying to leave behind. The arena stayed silent for a long moment after she whispered that word. "Impossible." The translator in my collar repeated it softly in English, as if even the machine was unsure it had heard her correctly. Around us the crowd began to murmur again, a ripple of confused voices moving through the metal stands like wind through dry grass. Kareth Nine had just challenged a human in front of half the colony, and now she looked like someone who had just opened a door and found the wrong universe behind it. I shifted my weight in the red dust, the heat from the twin suns pressing down on the back of my neck, and tried to remember the last time anyone had looked at me like that. It had been years. Too many years. Back when my name still showed up in official briefings and people spoke about the Orion War like it was something distant and heroic instead of the complicated mess it actually was. I had left that life behind on purpose. Kareth Nine was supposed to be quiet. A mining colony on the edge of explored space where nobody cared about old war stories as long as the fusion drills stayed operational and the cargo ships left on schedule. That was why I worked here. Machines do not ask questions about your past. They only ask for maintenance schedules and replacement parts. But Kareth was still staring at me, her golden eyes locked on my face like she was searching for proof of something. The spear in her hand had not moved an inch. The crowd above us noticed that too. One of the alien traders leaned over the railing and shouted something in a language I did not recognize, his voice echoing across the arena. Others joined in, curious and impatient. They had come expecting a duel. Instead, they were watching the most respected warrior on the planet hesitate in front of a mechanic who still smelled like hydraulic fluid. Finally, I cleared my throat. It felt strangely loud in the silence between us. "You are looking at me like I owe you money," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Humor usually helped in uncomfortable situations. This did not seem to be one of those situations. Kareth did not laugh. If anything, her expression tightened even more, like she had just confirmed a suspicion she wished had been wrong. She took one slow step closer. Up close, I could see faint lines of silver across the blue skin of her forearms, markings that looked ceremonial rather than decorative. Warrior symbols, maybe. Whatever they meant, they clearly mattered to her people. "State your name," she said quietly. The translator rendered her words perfectly, but there was something underneath them that the device could not capture. Not anger, not pride, something closer to disbelief. I considered lying. For half a second the thought crossed my mind that giving a fake name might make this whole strange moment disappear. But that would have been pointless. People with reputations like hers did not challenge strangers without doing their research first. If she had called me out here, she already knew enough. So I told her the truth. "Ethan Carter," I said, the moment the name left. My mouth, her shoulders stiffened like a circuit had just completed. A quiet gasp moved through the nearest row of spectators. One of the security officers near the arena gate straightened abruptly, recognition flickering across his face. Kareth's eyes did not leave mine. For a long time she said nothing at all. Then she spoke again, her voice low and careful, as if each word weighed more than the last. "The Quiet Butcher of Orion," she said slowly. The nickname echoed faintly from the translator, sounding even stranger out loud than it ever had in military reports. I felt a familiar heaviness settle in my chest. That name was supposed to belong to another life. A version of me that stayed buried under years of distance and routine maintenance jobs. I shook my head slightly. "You have the wrong man," I said. But the look in her eyes told me she did not believe that for a second. I had heard that nickname before in places far away from dusty mining colonies and quiet repair bays. Hearing it here, in the middle of a public arena on Kareth 9, felt like someone had suddenly opened an old door I had spent years trying to seal shut. "The Quiet Butcher of Orion." The words drifted across the red dust between us and hung in the hot afternoon air, while the crowd above the arena reacted all at once. A wave of voices rolled through the metal stands as dozens of species repeated the name through their translators, some curious, some excited, some clearly surprised. I rubbed the back of my neck and let out a slow breath. The twin suns were still beating down from the sky, and the temperature on my wrist display said 103 degrees Fahrenheit. But the sudden tension in the arena made the air feel even heavier. Kareth Voss had not moved. Her golden eyes were still fixed on me with that same careful intensity, as if every small detail of my face mattered. I could almost see the questions moving behind her expression. A few seconds passed before she finally spoke again. "You deny the title," she said quietly. "Yet you carry the posture of one who has stood in many battles." Her words were calm, not accusing, just observant. I glanced down at my hands. They were still smudged with dark engine grease from the fusion drill I had been repairing that morning. Hardly the hands of a legendary warrior. "I carry the posture of someone who fixes machines for a living," I replied. "And machines break a lot out here." A faint ripple of laughter moved through part of the crowd, but Kareth did not smile. Instead, she slowly lifted the spear from the ground and rested it across her shoulder, not in an attacking position, but not entirely relaxed either. "Records travel far across the stars," she said. "Stories as well." She took another step closer until only a few feet of red dust separated us. Up close I could see that the silver markings on her armor were etched with tiny symbols, hundreds of them arranged in careful lines like a history written directly onto the metal. Each one probably represented a victory or an honor earned in battle. My own clothing was a faded maintenance jacket with a company logo stitched on the chest. The contrast between us was almost ridiculous. One of the security officers near the gate finally spoke up from behind the barrier. "Commander Carter," he said cautiously, clearly unsure whether to treat me like a civilian or something else. Is there any truth to what she said? I gave him a tired look. If I were a commander, do you really think I would be repairing mining equipment for 12 hours a day? The officer did not answer. His silence told me he had already searched the name Ethan Carter in whatever database he had access to. Kalara watched the exchange carefully, then returned her attention to me. For a moment her proud warrior composure slipped just enough to reveal something unexpected underneath. Curiosity. In my culture, she said slowly, warriors are taught to recognize others who have carried great responsibility, even when those warriors attempt to hide it. I folded my arms across my chest and shrugged slightly. Then maybe your training needs an update. The corner of her mouth twitched, almost like she wanted to smile, but was not sure if the moment allowed it. Around us the arena had grown strangely quiet again. The spectators were leaning forward over the railings, watching the conversation unfold instead of the dramatic duel they had been expecting. Finally Kalara spoke one more time, her voice softer now, but no less certain. You may deny the name, she said, but I did not freeze because I recognized a warrior. She paused just long enough for the entire arena to hold its breath. I froze because the legends say the quiet butcher of Orion vanished 10 years ago. Her golden eyes locked onto mine again with unwavering focus. And legends are rarely wrong. The arena stayed quiet after Kalara spoke those words, the kind of quiet that felt heavier than noise. Legends are rarely wrong. The sentence drifted through the hot air while the crowd above us shifted along the railings, metal creaking softly under the weight of dozens of curious spectators. I stared at her for a moment, then let out a slow breath. The red dust at my feet swirled lightly as the wind rolled across the open pit, carrying the faint smell of machine coolant and overheated metal from the mining rigs parked half a mile away. 10 years. That was how long it had been since anyone had said that name to my face. 10 years of quiet work orders, replacement circuits, and cargo manifests. 10 years of waking up early, fixing drills that weighed 2,000 pounds, and pretending the rest of my life had never happened. I shook my head slowly. Legends are stories people tell when they do not know the full truth, I said. My voice sounded calmer than I expected. Maybe because after a decade the memories felt more like someone else's life than my own. Kalara studied me carefully, her golden eyes narrowing slightly, as if she were measuring every word. The spear was still resting across her shoulder, but she had shifted her stance. Not aggressive, not relaxed. Something in between, the posture of a warrior trying to solve a puzzle. The truth travels with records, she replied. Military archives across 12 star systems list the same name. A quiet murmur moved through the crowd again. Apparently the spectators were enjoying the mystery even more than they would have enjoyed a duel. One of the cargo pilots leaned over the railing and shouted, "Is the human famous or something?" Another voice answered in a different language before the translator caught up and repeated it in English. "He repaired my engine last week." I rubbed my forehead and sighed. Of all the places for the past to catch up with me, a mining arena was not the setting I would have chosen. "Listen," I said, looking back at Kalara. "You came here expecting a fight. I am telling you that you picked the wrong guy." For the first time since the challenge began, she tilted her head slightly. The movement was subtle, but it changed her expression just enough to reveal something beneath the proud warrior mask. Curiosity again. "That is what confuses me," she admitted. "If the records are correct, you should not be standing here pretending to be ordinary." I shrugged and gestured toward the stands. "Look around. This colony runs on people who do ordinary jobs. Mechanics, pilots, engineers, miners. Someone has to keep the equipment running." Kalara glanced briefly toward the heavy drilling machines parked beyond the arena wall. Massive structures of steel and glowing power conduits, each one capable of cutting through half a mile of rock in a single shift. When she looked back at me, her expression had softened slightly. "Where I come from," she said slowly, "warriors do not disappear into quiet lives." I gave a small half-smile. "Where I come from, surviving a war usually makes people want exactly that." The wind shifted again, blowing a thin cloud of dust across the arena floor. For a few seconds neither of us spoke. Then Kalara lowered the spear from her shoulder and held it upright beside her. The movement was calm and deliberate, the way someone ends a challenge without announcing it out loud. The crowd noticed immediately. Confused whispers rolled through the stands. One spectator even groaned in disappointment. Kareth ignored them. Her eyes remained fixed on me. "If you truly are not the person the records describe," she said quietly, "then this is simply a misunderstanding." She paused, studying my face one more time. "But if the records are correct, then you have chosen a very strange place to hide, Ethan Carter." I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could say anything, a sharp electronic tone echoed from the communication towers mounted around the arena walls. The sound cut through the air like a warning bell. Every device on the colony used that signal for only one reason: incoming alert from orbital sensors. The crowd looked up toward the sky almost at the same time. And for the first time since the strange confrontation began, Kareth's attention shifted away from me. Her golden eyes lifted toward the clouds above Kareth Nine. The electronic warning tone echoed again across the colony, louder this time, vibrating through the steel structure of the arena and cutting through the restless murmurs of the crowd. Every person in the stands turned their heads toward the sky above Kareth Nine. I followed their gaze. The twin suns still hung high over the horizon, bright enough to wash most of the stars out of sight. But the colony defense grid projected a faint blue overlay across the atmosphere whenever the orbital sensors detected something unusual. Right now, that faint grid shimmered like heat over the entire sky. That was not normal. The spectators began talking all at once. Some of them activated wrist displays, while others looked toward the communication towers mounted along the outer walls of the mining complex. The towers had begun flashing amber lights in a slow repeating pattern. I had worked on those systems during my second month on the colony. Amber meant unidentified ships approaching within 2,000 miles of orbit. Kareth lowered her spear slightly and turned her head upward, the sunlight reflecting off the polished edges of her armor. Her posture changed immediately, the stillness of a warrior preparing to evaluate a new situation. "Your colony alarms respond quickly," she said quietly. "They have to," I replied. "Mining operations attract visitors who do not always send friendly messages first." My wrist display vibrated with a new notification. I lifted my arm and tapped the screen. A basic sensor report scrolled across the interface. 3 vessels had entered the outer detection range less than 60 seconds ago. Their transponder codes were either inactive or deliberately masked. That alone was enough to make the entire colony uneasy. Above us, the arena crowd began moving toward the exit ramps. The earlier excitement about a public duel vanished almost instantly. When people live on the edge of explored space, they learn to respect alarms. One of the security officers near the gate spoke into a handheld communicator, his voice tense but controlled. "All personnel move to standard safety zones. Repeat, move to safety zones until orbital control confirms vessel identity." The officer glanced at me briefly as he spoke, as if he still was not sure whether I was supposed to be treated as a civilian mechanic or something else entirely. Kareth noticed that look as well. Her golden eyes flicked from the officer back to me. "You read the sensor report already," she said. It was not a question. I shrugged lightly. Habit. The truth was that after years in places where early warnings could decide whether people lived or died, I had never fully stopped paying attention to alert signals. Even after 10 years of quiet work on remote colonies, the instincts were still there. Kareth studied me for a moment, then looked back toward the sky again. "Unidentified ships approaching a mining world rarely arrive without a reason," she said. I nodded slowly. "Most of the time the reason is curiosity about valuable minerals." "And the other times?" she asked. I gave a small dry smile. "The other times it is curiosity about how prepared the colony is." Another tone echoed from the communication towers, followed by a calm voice broadcast through the public speakers mounted around the arena walls. "Attention all residents of Kareth Nine. Orbital sensors confirm 3 inbound vessels maintaining low-velocity approach. Identification request has been transmitted. Await further updates." The message repeated twice before the speakers went silent again. By now, most of the spectators had already left the stands. The arena that had been filled with voices minutes earlier now felt strangely open and quiet. Only a few security officers remained near the gates, watching the sky with cautious expressions. Kareth rested the base of her spear against the ground and folded one arm across her chest, her gaze still fixed upward. "Your people appear uncertain," she observed. That happens when visitors do not introduce themselves, I replied. The faint blue defense grid shimmered again across the sky as the orbital sensors adjusted their tracking. Somewhere far above the atmosphere, 3 unknown ships were descending slowly toward the colony. I could not see them yet, but something about the pattern on my wrist display made the old instinct stir again. Kareth glanced at me out of the corner of her eye. "You are thinking about something," she said. I hesitated for a moment, then nodded slightly. "Yeah," I said. "I am thinking that if those ships were just traders, they would have answered the identification signal by now." Kareth followed my gaze back to the sky. The quiet between us lasted only a few seconds before she spoke again, her voice calm but serious. "Then perhaps this misunderstanding between us will have to wait," she said. I exhaled slowly and watched the shimmering defense grid above the colony. "Looks like it," I replied. The arena had almost emptied by the time the next alert came through the colony speakers. The wind pushed thin waves of red dust across the ground where a crowd had been standing only minutes earlier, and the metal seating above us creaked quietly as the last spectators hurried down the ramps toward the safety corridors. The sudden silence made the open pit feel twice as large. Kareth and I were still standing in the center of it, both of us watching the sky where the faint blue defense grid shimmered like a distant curtain of light. My wrist display vibrated again. I raised my arm and opened the new sensor update. The 3 ships had descended another 500 miles closer to the planet. Their speed was slow and controlled, but the system still listed their identification status as unknown. That meant they had ignored the second request from orbital control. That alone was enough to make any frontier colony uneasy. One of the security officers walked down the arena steps toward us, his boots echoing against the metal floor plates. He looked from me to Kareth and back again, clearly unsure how to address the situation that had started as a dual challenge and now felt like something entirely different. "You two should probably move to the operations center," he said. "Orbital control is asking for additional eyes on the situation." I lowered my arm and looked at him. "I fix mining equipment," I reminded him. "I am not part of Colony Command." The officer gave a tired half-smile. "Maybe not officially," he said, "but the system logs show you accessed the sensor report before half my team did." Kareth listened to the exchange quietly. When the officer finished speaking, she stepped forward, the tip of her spear touching the arena floor with a soft metallic sound. "If unidentified ships approach your world," she said calmly, "then additional observation is wise. I will accompany him." The officer blinked once in surprise, but nodded quickly. "Fine by me. Anyone who understands sensors is welcome right now." He turned and started walking toward the exit ramp that led into the main mining complex. Kareth and I followed a few steps behind. As we moved through the open gate, I glanced back once at the empty arena. A few minutes earlier it had been filled with spectators waiting to see a public challenge. Now the only sound left was the low hum of the colony's power grid and the distant rumble of the fusion drills that were still running outside the perimeter walls. Kareth walked beside me with long, steady strides. Up close I could hear the quiet movement of the articulated plates in her armor every time she shifted her shoulders. After a moment she spoke without looking at me. "You analyze sensor data like someone trained to evaluate battlefield reports," she said. "That habit is difficult to forget." I kept my eyes on the corridor ahead of us. The overhead lights cast long white reflections across the metal floor panels as we entered the main operations hallway. "Fixing equipment also requires paying attention to system diagnostics," I replied. "Numbers tell you when something is about to break." She turned her head slightly and studied my face again, that same thoughtful curiosity returning to her expression. "Ships approaching without identification are rarely harmless," she said. "Your instincts noticed that immediately." I shrugged once. "Anyone who has worked on frontier colonies long enough notices it." The security officer reached the end of the corridor and pushed open a heavy sliding door. Beyond it, the colony operations center buzzed with activity. Several technicians were standing around a circular display table that projected a glowing holographic map of the sky above Kareth 9. 3 small markers blinked steadily near the edge of the projection. I did not need to read the labels to know what they represented. The officer stepped aside and gestured toward the display. "Those are the visitors," he said. Kareth moved closer to the projection and studied the blinking points with focused attention. I crossed my arms and looked at the same display. The ships were now within 300 miles of orbital range, still moving slowly, still ignoring every identification request the colony had sent. One of the technicians looked up from the console and asked quietly, "Do either of you recognize the approach pattern?" I stared at the glowing markers for a long moment. The formation looked familiar in a way I did not like at all. Kalara noticed my silence and glanced toward me. "You have seen this before," she said. I exhaled slowly. "Yeah," I answered. "A long time ago." The operations center was filled with the quiet tension of people who understood that something unusual was unfolding above their world. The circular holographic display in the middle of the room projected a rotating map of the sky around Kareth 9, and the 3 blinking markers moved slowly across the grid like distant stars that refused to stay still. Technicians stood around the table watching the approach data update in real time, while soft electronic tones chimed every few seconds from the consoles lining the walls. Kalara and I stood side by side near the edge of the projection, both of us studying the pattern of the incoming ships. One of the technicians tapped a control panel and magnified the orbital map until the markers expanded into clearer shapes. Their trajectory lines appeared as faint white curves that bent gently toward the planet's upper atmosphere. I could feel Kalara's gaze shift toward me again. "You recognize the formation," she said quietly. I kept my eyes on the display for another moment before answering. "Not the ships themselves," I said. "Just the way they are moving." The technician closest to us looked up from his console. "Is that good news or bad news?" he asked. I rubbed my chin slowly and considered the question. "It means they know what they are doing," I replied. 3 vessels spreading their approach vectors like that is not random navigation. It is a coordinated entry pattern. The room grew a little quieter after I said that. Several of the technicians exchanged quick glances while the security officer who had escorted us and crossed his arms and leaned closer to the display. "So they are organized," he said. "That does not necessarily mean they are hostile." "No," I agreed. "It just means they are experienced." Kalara studied the projected ships carefully, her golden eyes following the thin lines that marked their descent path. "On my world," she said thoughtfully, "that formation is used by scouting groups who wish to evaluate a planet before landing." The technician nodded slowly. "Our sensors are picking up advanced navigation adjustments every few seconds," he said. "Whoever is flying those ships is making constant corrections to maintain that triangle pattern." I watched the glowing markers move another fraction closer to the planet. The distance indicator beside each one now read 180 miles above the upper atmosphere. That was close enough for the colony's telescopes to begin visual scans. A moment later, one of the wall screens flickered to life with a magnified image of the sky. 3 small metallic shapes appeared against the black background of space, their hulls reflecting faint light from the distant suns. They were sleek, narrow vessels with curved frames that looked more like racing craft than cargo ships. Kalara tilted her head slightly. "Those are not mining transports," she observed. "Definitely not," I said. The security officer tapped his communicator again and spoke quietly into the device. "Orbital control, this is ground operations. Visual confirmation received. Please advise if identification signal has been acknowledged." A few seconds passed before a calm voice responded through the speaker. "Negative." The vessels remained silent. The officer lowered the communicator slowly and looked back at the display. I could feel the room's attention shift toward me again. The technician who had asked the earlier question cleared his throat. "You said you have seen this before," he said carefully. "Where?" I hesitated for a moment. The glowing markers on the holographic map continued moving closer to the planet in that precise triangular formation. Kalara waited quietly beside me, her posture steady but alert. Finally I spoke. "During the Orion conflict," I said. The words seemed to settle over the room like a weight. One of the technicians leaned forward slightly. "That was a long time ago," he said. "What kind of ships used this approach pattern back then?" I kept my eyes on the blinking markers for another few seconds before answering. "The kind that arrive quietly," I said, "because they want to see how a colony reacts before they decide what to do next." Kalara's gaze lifted from the display and turned toward me again. "And how did those encounters usually end?" she asked. I gave a small tired smile. "That depended entirely on how prepared the colony was. At that exact moment, one of the markers on the display flashed brighter than the others as the sensor system updated its data. The technician stared at the screen and frowned. "Something just changed," he said. "One of the ships is accelerating." The room went silent again as every pair of eyes focused on the glowing map. Every pair of eyes in the operations center shifted to the blinking marker that had suddenly accelerated. The holographic map adjusted automatically, recalculating the new trajectory as the glowing point separated slightly from the other two vessels in the formation. The technician who had noticed the change leaned closer to his console, fingers moving quickly across the controls. "Speed just increased by 30%, he said, his voice tight with concentration. "Altitude is dropping faster now." The second technician tapped another panel, and the large wall display zoomed in on the lead vessel. The image sharpened gradually until the narrow metallic craft filled the screen. Its hull was smooth and curved, with faint bands of pale light running along the sides like thin rivers of energy. Even from the magnified image, it looked fast. Very fast. Kareth studied the ship silently for a moment. "That vessel is separating from the others intentionally," she said. "It is not drifting." I nodded slowly. "Looks like a probe approach." The security officer glanced at me. "Explain that." I folded my arms and kept my eyes on the display. When scouting groups arrive somewhere unfamiliar, they often send one ship closer first, I said. It lets them observe how the planet reacts before the rest of the group commits. The officer frowned. "So it is a test." "Exactly," I replied. The technician glanced up from his console again. "Orbital control just confirmed the ship is adjusting its path toward the colony's communication satellites." Kareth tilted her head slightly. "That suggests curiosity about your systems." I gave a small humorless smile. "Or curiosity about how quickly we respond." The marker on the holographic display moved another fraction closer to the planet. Its distance indicator now read 120 miles above the atmosphere. The two remaining ships stayed farther back, still maintaining their triangular spacing, like patient observers watching the experiment unfold. The room grew quieter as everyone watched the approach data update in real time. One of the technicians adjusted the visual feed again, and the large screen displayed the ship from a different angle. From this view, I could see small rotating structures along the underside of the hull. Sensors. Probably long-range scanning arrays. Kareth noticed them at the same moment. "It is examining your infrastructure," she said calmly. "Power grid. Communications. Defense network." The security officer rubbed his chin uneasily. "That is a lot of curiosity for visitors who refuse to answer identification. Requests." I glanced at the holographic map again. The ship had slowed slightly as it neared the orbital layer where the colony's communication satellites drifted in slow rotation around the planet. The blue defense grid shimmered faintly across the display as the sensor network tracked the vessel's movements. "If they were planning something aggressive," the technician said cautiously, "would they really approach this slowly?" I considered that for a moment. "Sometimes the slowest approach reveals the most information," I said. Kareth's golden eyes moved from the display to my face again. "You speak like someone who has been on the other side of this situation." I did not answer immediately. Instead, I watched the blinking marker glide closer to the thin ring of satellite icons that surrounded the holographic image of Kareth 9. The ship adjusted its orientation slightly, turning its nose toward one of the outer communication relays. Another technician spoke up from the far console. "Orbital control is reporting active scanning pulses from the vessel," she said. "Non-destructive, but very detailed." The security officer exhaled slowly. "So they are mapping the colony before saying hello." Kareth rested one hand lightly on the shaft of her spear and studied the display again. "That behavior suggests discipline," she said. "Not recklessness." I nodded faintly. "The kind of discipline you see in groups that have done this many times." The technician closest to the holographic table suddenly leaned forward again. "Hold on," he said. "The ship just transmitted something." Everyone in the room looked toward his console. The technician adjusted the receiver filters and listened for a second before turning toward us. "It is not a standard greeting," he said slowly. "It is a single signal packet." The security officer frowned. "What kind of packet?" The technician tapped the screen once more, then looked up with clear confusion in his expression. "A data request," he said. "They are asking for the colony's response protocols." The room went completely silent. The silence in the operations center lingered for several seconds after the technician spoke those words. A data request for the colony's response protocols was not a normal greeting between ships and a frontier settlement. Every person in the room seemed to understand that immediately. The holographic display continued rotating slowly in the center of the room, while the blinking marker representing the lead vessel hovered near the ring of communication. Satellites surrounding Kareth 9. The technician tapped his console again, double-checking the signal packet. "I am reading the transmission clearly," he said. "They are requesting information about how the colony reacts to unidentified visitors." The security officer frowned and leaned closer to the display. "That is not something we normally share," he said. I nodded quietly. "It is the exact opposite of something you share." Kalyra studied the screen with a thoughtful expression. The soft blue glow of the holographic map reflected faintly across the polished surface of her armor. "Why would they ask for that directly?" she asked. The technician shrugged uneasily. "Maybe they expect an automated response." I shook my head slightly. "More likely they are measuring how we respond to the request itself." The security officer looked toward me again. "You mean the message is part of the test?" "Exactly," I replied. "If the colony panics, delays, or sends the wrong type of reply, they learn something valuable." Kalyra's golden eyes flicked briefly toward me. "Then the question becomes what they hope to learn." The technician at the far console turned in his chair. "Orbital control is asking whether we should respond to the request." The security officer hesitated. His hand hovered above the communicator on his belt while he considered the options. Frontier colonies usually followed strict guidelines for unknown contacts, but those guidelines rarely covered situations this unusual. I stepped closer to the holographic table and studied the 3 blinking markers again. The 2 distant ships remained steady, holding their positions more than 100 miles behind the lead vessel. Their patience alone told me a lot. "If we ignore the message completely," I said slowly, "they learn that the colony might be cautious but uncertain." The officer glanced at me. "And if we answer it?" I exhaled quietly. "Then they learn how much information we are willing to give away." Kalyra rested her hand lightly on the shaft of her spear as she observed the glowing map. "There is another possibility," she said calmly. "They may be testing whether someone experienced is present among your people." The security officer raised an eyebrow. "Experienced in what?" Kalyra looked directly at me. "In recognizing the game they are playing." For a moment nobody in the room spoke. The technician finally cleared his throat. "Orbital control is still waiting for instructions," he said. I stared at the blinking marker representing the lead vessel. Its position shifted slightly as the ship adjusted its orbit beside the communications satellite. The timing was deliberate. Whoever was flying that craft expected an answer. I folded my arms and thought about the old training manuals I had not opened in a decade. Patterns like this had appeared many times during the Orion conflict. Not hostile moves. Not peaceful greetings either. Something in between. A careful probe designed to learn exactly how prepared the other side might be. The security officer broke the silence again. "Well," he said quietly, "do we respond?" I looked up at the technicians, the officer, and finally at Kalyra standing beside me. Then I turned my attention back to the glowing map of the sky above Kareth 9. "Yes," I said slowly, "but not the way they expect." The technician leaned forward immediately. "What kind of reply should we send?" I watched the lead ship drift beside the communications satellite for another second before answering. "Send them a message that says the colony recognizes their approach pattern," I said. The officer blinked. "Just that." I nodded once. "That will tell them everything they need to know." Kalyra studied my face carefully again. "And what exactly will they learn from that message?" she asked quietly. I gave a small tired smile while the holographic map continued rotating in the center of the room. "They will learn," I said, "that someone here has seen this test before." The technician did not move for a second after I gave the instruction. The room stayed quiet except for the soft hum of the consoles and the slow rotation of the holographic sky map in the center of the operations table. Then he nodded once and turned back to his control panel. His fingers moved carefully across the interface while he composed the outgoing transmission. "Message prepared," he said after a few seconds. "Transmitting now." The words echoed lightly through the room as the signal left the colony communication array and traveled toward the waiting ship near the orbital satellites. Everyone in the operations center watched the blinking marker on the holographic display as if it might react instantly. For several long seconds, nothing changed. The lead vessel remained perfectly still beside the satellite relay, while the other two ships held their positions farther out in space. Kareth stood beside me with her arms folded loosely, her golden eyes focused on the rotating map. "Now we observe," she said quietly. I nodded slightly. "Exactly." The technician leaned forward over his console, tracking the signal response channels. "Transmission confirmed delivered," he reported. No immediate reply yet. The security officer crossed his arms again and shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "How long do these kinds of tests usually take?" he asked. I considered the question for a moment. "Long enough to see whether the other side stays calm," I said. The officer gave a short breath that was almost a laugh. "That is comforting." The holographic map rotated another few degrees, and the glowing marker representing the lead ship flickered faintly as the sensor system updated its position. Suddenly, one of the technicians spoke up from the far console. "Receiving response signal," she said. Every head in the room turned toward her station. She adjusted the receiver filters and listened to the incoming transmission for a moment before routing it through the main system. The room speakers emitted a soft tone as the translation program activated. A calm voice followed, smooth and precise. "Colony of Kareth 9. The translated message said, "Your response indicates recognition of our observational pattern." The technician looked up in surprise. They acknowledged the message directly. The security officer leaned closer to the display table. "What does that mean?" I watched the glowing marker drift slightly away from the communications satellite before answering. "It means they understand that we know what they are doing." Kareth tilted her head thoughtfully as the voice from the speakers continued. "Your colony demonstrates awareness of exploratory contact procedures," the message said. "That suggests experienced leadership." A faint ripple of murmurs moved through the technicians around the room. The security officer glanced at me again. "They are talking about you." I shrugged lightly. "They are talking about the colony." The transmission paused for a moment before the voice returned. "In light of this response," the message continued, "we will proceed with formal introduction." The technician tapped another control, and the wall display shifted to a new camera angle from the orbital telescopes. The lead ship had begun moving again, slowly rotating until its nose pointed toward the planet's upper atmosphere. The other two vessels adjusted their positions at the same time, sliding inward to close the triangular formation. Kareth watched it. "Maneuver carefully. They are committing to the approach now," she said. I nodded. "Looks like it." The technician at the console turned back toward us. "They are transmitting identification codes," he said. His expression shifted slightly as he read the data appearing on his screen. "That is unusual." The security officer raised an eyebrow. "Unusual how?" The technician hesitated before answering. "The signal lists them as part of an interstellar survey group," he said. "But the registry indicates they are not from any government." The room grew quiet again. Kareth glanced toward me once more. "Independent explorers," she said thoughtfully. "Possibly," I replied. The technician continued reading the incoming data. "Their message includes one additional line," he said slowly. "It is addressed specifically to the person who recognized their approach pattern." The officer looked directly at me again. "That would be you." The technician cleared his throat and read the final line from the transmission. "To the individual known as Ethan Carter," he said, "our captain requests a direct conversation." The entire room fell silent once more. The silence in the operations center deepened after the technician finished reading the final line of the transmission. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. The holographic map continued rotating slowly above the display table, the three glowing markers now drifting closer together as the ships adjusted their formation for a controlled approach. I felt every pair of eyes in the room shift toward me. The security officer broke the quiet first. "Well," he said carefully, "it looks like they know exactly who they want to talk to." I rubbed the back of my neck and let out a slow breath. 10 quiet years on the edge of space had almost convinced me that the universe had forgotten my name. Apparently it had not. One of the technicians glanced between the officer and me. "Should we accept the request for communication?" she asked. The officer hesitated before answering. Normally that decision would come from Colony Command. He looked toward the ceiling for a moment, as if expecting someone higher up to appear. Then he looked back at me again. But they asked for you specifically. Kalara had not moved since the message was read. She stood beside the holographic display with the calm stillness of someone used to watching important decisions unfold. Her golden eyes studied my expression quietly. It appears the visitors believe. You are important to this situation, she said. I gave a small tired smile. That is a misunderstanding I have been trying to maintain for 10 years. The technician cleared his throat gently. The incoming channel is still open, he said. They are waiting. I looked at the blinking markers on the display again. The lead vessel had already moved slightly below the level of the communication satellites, its hull reflecting faint sunlight as it adjusted its orbit. Whoever was commanding that ship had clearly expected the conversation to happen. The security officer folded his arms. If you decline the conversation, he said, they may interpret that as hostility. I nodded once. And if I accept it? The officer shrugged. Then we find out why they asked. Kalara shifted her weight slightly and rested both hands on the shaft of her spear. You have faced situations like this before, she said quietly. What would you have done during the Orion conflict? I thought about that for a moment. The memory of old briefing rooms and long strategy discussions drifted through my mind like distant echoes. Back then the answer had always been simple. Communication revealed intentions faster than silence. I exhaled slowly and looked toward the technician. Open the channel, I said. The technician nodded immediately and began adjusting the console settings. The wall display flickered once as the communication feed connected. A moment later the image of the approaching ship appeared on the screen again, but this time a small window opened beside it. Static rippled across the window for a second before resolving into a clear view of a command deck. The interior lighting was soft and blue, illuminating a tall figure standing near the center of the frame. The being looked vaguely humanoid, though taller and more slender than most humans, with pale silver skin and calm amber eyes. Behind the figure, several control stations glowed with quiet activity. The alien captain studied the camera for a moment before speaking. The translator activated instantly. Greetings, Ethan Carter, the voice said in a smooth, measured tone. The room behind me fell completely silent. The captain inclined their head slightly in what looked like a respectful gesture. Your recognition of our approach pattern was impressive. I crossed my arms and leaned slightly against the edge of the display table. You could have just introduced yourselves, I replied calmly. The captain's amber eyes flickered with faint amusement. Where would be the curiosity in that? A few of the technicians exchanged uncertain looks. Kalara remained perfectly still beside me, watching the screen with focused attention. The captain continued speaking. We rarely encounter frontier colonies capable of recognizing exploratory evaluation protocols so quickly, the alien said. It suggested that someone with unusual experience might be present. I gave a small shrug. You ran a test, and the colony passed. The captain nodded slowly. Indeed. The figure's gaze shifted slightly, as if examining the room beyond the camera. However, the captain added, there is another reason we wish to speak with you. I raised an eyebrow. And that would be. The captain's expression grew thoughtful. During our archival research before entering this system, the alien said, we discovered several historical references connected to your name. The room grew quiet again as the captain continued. Those references describe a human strategist who influenced several pivotal moments during the Orion conflict. Kalara's eyes turned toward me again. I sighed softly. That was a long time ago. The captain inclined their head once more. History has a way of remaining relevant, the alien replied. Then the captain's amber eyes focused directly on mine through the camera, which is precisely why we came here. The operations center remained silent after the alien captain spoke those final words. The holographic sky map continued rotating slowly beside the communication screen, its soft blue glow reflecting across the walls, and the tense faces of the technicians gathered around the consoles. I looked at the captain for a long moment before answering. You came all the way to a mining colony on the edge of the charted systems because of something written in an old war archive, I said calmly. The captain's amber eyes remained steady. Not only because of that, the alien replied, but it was the beginning of our interest. Behind me, I could hear the faint shifting of boots as the security officer adjusted his stance. The technicians were listening carefully now, every movement in the room slowing as the conversation continued. Kalera stood at my side with the quiet stillness of a warrior observing a strategic exchange. The captain spoke again. Our survey group studies emerging civilizations and the patterns that shape them, the alien explained. During our research, we discovered multiple historical analyses of the Orion conflict. The captain paused briefly, as if choosing the next words carefully. Your name appeared in those analyses more than once. I gave a small sigh. History has a way of exaggerating things, I said. The captain shook their head slightly. On the contrary, most historical records understate the influence of individuals who prefer to remain unnoticed. Kalera glanced at me quietly, her golden eyes thoughtful but respectful. The captain continued speaking. The archives described a strategist who avoided unnecessary escalation while still protecting civilian colonies. Someone who believed preparation and patience were stronger tools than aggression. I looked down at the floor for a moment and then back at the screen. That was a different time, I said. And a different life. The captain inclined their head again. Yet the instincts remain. I folded my arms and leaned slightly against the display table. You sent a scouting pattern designed to test a colony's response, I said. You asked for our protocols to see if anyone recognized the trap. That tells me you were not just surveying mineral deposits. The captain's expression softened slightly. Correct. The alien stepped closer to the camera on the command deck. Our mission is to identify worlds where cooperation between species might thrive. A quiet murmur moved through the technicians in the room. The captain continued. Frontier colonies are often the earliest signs of how different cultures will coexist in the future. I glanced at the holographic map again, where the three vessels now held a stable orbit above Kareth 9. And you decided to test us first. Observation is our primary method, the captain replied calmly. Kalera finally spoke, her voice steady. And what conclusion have you reached about this colony? The captain looked toward her through the camera, clearly noticing the tall blue-skinned warrior standing beside me. Our initial conclusion is promising, the alien said. A colony that responds calmly to unknown visitors shows discipline. The captain's amber eyes returned to me again. A colony where a former strategist quietly repairs mining equipment shows something even more interesting. I raised an eyebrow slightly. Which is? The captain gave the faintest hint of a smile. Humility. The room remained quiet for a moment as the words settled in the air. The captain continued speaking in the same calm tone. Our survey group is seeking worlds that value cooperation rather than dominance. The aliens. Gaze remained steady on mine through the camera. And today your colony demonstrated exactly that. I exhaled slowly. So this entire encounter was a test to see if we would overreact. Partly, the captain replied. But there is one more reason we wish to speak with you directly. The technicians in the operations center leaned slightly closer to the communication screen. Even the security officer seemed curious now. The captain's voice softened slightly as the final statement came through the translator. Our mission has brought us to hundreds of worlds, the alien said. But very few contain individuals who understand conflict well enough to avoid it. The captain paused for a brief moment before finishing the thought. We believe your colony may become an important crossroads for future cooperation. Kalera looked at me again as the captain's words echoed quietly through the room. Then the alien captain added one final sentence. And we were curious to see whether the human described in the Orion archives still existed. For a moment, the operations center remained completely silent after the alien captain finished speaking. The holographic map continued its slow rotation, casting soft blue light across the room, while the three survey ships held their steady orbit above Kareth 9. I leaned against the edge of the display table and looked at the captain on the screen. 10 years ago, someone might have answered that kind of statement with a speech about strategy or responsibility. 10 years ago, someone might have tried to explain the long chain of decisions that turned a quiet engineer into a name in military archives. But the man standing in this operations center had spent the last decade replacing broken drill motors and calibrating power regulators for mining equipment. I shook my head slightly. You might be disappointed, I said calmly. The person in those archives stayed behind in another life. The captain studied me quietly for a moment. The alien's amber eyes reflected the soft blue light of the command deck behind them. History often describes individuals as fixed points, the captain replied. But in reality, people change. I gave a small half smile. You traveled across several systems to confirm that. In part, the captain said. But we also came to see what kind of world grows around individuals like you. Behind me, one of the technicians shifted slightly, clearly trying to remain quiet while listening. The security officer had stopped pretending to look busy and was now watching the screen openly. Kalara remained beside me, her posture relaxed but attentive. The captain continued speaking in the same calm tone. Many civilizations build their identity around conquest or dominance, the alien said. Others focus on survival alone. The captain gestured slightly toward the holographic sky map visible behind me through the camera feed. Your colony appears to be something different. I glanced over my shoulder at the technicians and the glowing display table. It is a mining colony, I said. People here mostly care about keeping the equipment running and getting through the next work shift. The captain gave a faint nod. And yet when confronted with uncertainty, your people did not panic. The alien paused briefly before continuing. They listened. They evaluated the situation. And they trusted the calm judgment of someone who had experience. Kalara spoke softly beside me. That is the behavior of a stable community. The captain inclined their head toward her in acknowledgement. Precisely. The room fell quiet again as the survey ships continued their slow orbit beyond the atmosphere. I folded my arms and looked back at the captain. So what happens now? I asked. The captain's expression relaxed slightly. Now we complete our survey, the alien replied. But we will record this colony as a location of interest for future cooperation. I nodded once. That sounds like a peaceful outcome. The captain's amber eyes flickered with what might have been amusement. Peaceful outcomes are often the result of careful preparation, the alien said. The connection remained open for another moment before the captain added one final thought. The archives described a strategist who believed conflict could often be prevented long before it began. I let out a quiet breath. That sounds like something I might have said once. The captain gave a respectful nod. Then perhaps the archives were accurate after all. The communication screen dimmed slightly as the transmission ended and the wall display returned to the normal orbital camera feed. For a few seconds nobody in the operations center spoke. Finally the security officer exhaled loudly. Well, he said, that was not the kind of visitor briefing I expected today. One of the technicians laughed nervously and returned to adjusting the sensor readouts. The tension in the room slowly faded as people went back to their stations. Outside the colony, the 3 survey ships remained in quiet orbit against the darkness of space. Kalara turned toward me and studied my face thoughtfully. It appears the legends did not exaggerate as much as you believe, she said. I shook my head with a small smile and started walking toward the exit corridor. The legends are about someone who spent too much time thinking about war, I replied. I glanced once more at the sky through the observation window where the distant ships drifted peacefully above the planet. Then I looked back at Kalara. These days, I said, I prefer fixing machines that keep people alive. The blue-skinned warrior watched me for a moment before following me out of the operations center. And somewhere high above Kareth Nine, the quiet survey ships continued their patient orbit around a colony that had just proven something very simple about the human species.